Welcome to episode 14 of the Energy Balance Podcast. I'm Jay Fleldman, and joining me again today is my good friend Mike Fave. Today's episode is a continuation of our last Q&A episode, and today we'll be talking about how we can listen to our bodies and use our own experience to inform our experimentation, and how we can then translate these concepts into improving our health. And then this topic turned into a discussion or conversation about the role of different belief systems and our identity in our health. And this wasn't really planned. It kind of came out organically, and it was mostly us just kind of sorting through these ideas in a conversation. So I hope you guys enjoy listening in on that conversation. You'll have to let me know in the comments. If you do have any questions that you'd like us to answer on future Q&A episodes, you can send an email over to jay@jayfeldmanwellness.com. That's jay@jayfeldmanwellness.com. To check out the show notes for today's episode, head over to jayfeldmanwellness.com/podcast, where I'll be linking to any of the articles or studies or anything else that we referenced throughout today's episode. And as we'll be talking about throughout today's episode, it's really important to take your health into your own hands and to become your own authority when it comes to our health and our experimentation. But of course, in a lot of ways, that can be easier said than done. It takes a lot of time and effort and research, and it can be helpful to have some extra guidance. So if you are looking to have some extra guidance throughout your own experimentation, head over to jayfeldmanwellness.com/call and sign up for a free call, and I'd be happy to offer some guidance for you and help you throughout your health journey. And with that, let's get started.
Natalie says, is there a way I can learn to read my own body better, to know when I need more of certain foods like carbs throughout the day? Is this possible? Yeah. And I think this ties in directly with where we're going here. And I think it's important to get at this point that, at least in my experience, you need to develop a base of reference experiences and to be able to develop a framework on what's going on with your body and what's like why you feel a certain way and figure out like how different foods affect you and this and that, and have sort of like repeatable experiences. I think a lot of people don't realize that just as kids have to grow into their coordination abilities in order to run or to throw or to do anything like that, you know, when you're young, you're a little bit uncoordinated and things like that. You also have to grow into your ability to perceive and be aware of what's going on with you and to sense different things that are going on with you. It's almost like an exploration in and of itself to be able to understand these things. And part of
practice.
Yeah, it definitely takes practice, and it takes being aware consistently. And it takes being able to sit there and try and figure out what a relationship between something is, rather than just writing it off. I mean, and I see a lot of people do this. I didn't sleep well last night. It was because of, I don't know, like this or that, like something very random, or I woke up and my shoulder or my back is in pain. It's like I must have slept wrong. And you know, people write a lot of things off rather than trying to see, well, every time I eat starch, this particular starch, my sleep doesn't go very well. It's more like, I just didn't sleep well. I just didn't sleep good last night. It must have been a full moon. It must have been and I'm not saying that a lot of these factors can't take place,
right?
But I think that some like thought and some analysis in what's going on is helpful. And eventually you start to figure things out. And I think for a lot of people to regain the health that they want, it becomes important to be able to, number one, separate yourself objectively from what's going on. So when you sit there and you say, you know, I'm low carb, but I'm really craving carbs, and I really want that glass of orange juice. And then you sit there and you're like, okay, I'm going to drink orange juice for 2 weeks and I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to see how I feel, and be able to sit there and be objective about it and not be attached to, well, if I drink orange juice, it's going to raise my insulin and I'm going to get cancer and diabetes and I'm going to get fat and da-da-da-da-da. It's like, well, why don't you try it for 2 weeks and then you'll see. And then the other thing you can do is when you have these questions, go into the research and look at the direct research of things. And I do that personally for certain things, if I want to understand something, and I go directly to the source. And if it says, when I give in studies, if I gave a bunch of these kids or diabetics orange juice, did they become more diabetic? No, they didn't. Okay, let's see. Maybe we'll try. Maybe we'll see what's going on. And then I think that it's important. And I think for a lot of people, when they see somebody else doing it and it didn't kill them, or it didn't make them fat, or it didn't make them diabetic, or they didn't get all these random sort of ideas that they didn't get candida overgrowth because they drank orange juice. When they see somebody else doing it, I think that helps people and allows them to be like, okay. Because I know for you and I, there's a lot of times where when we were doing low carb stuff, I would be on the weekend and I'd be like, bro, I need to eat something. And then I would just be like, I'm going to do it, whatever I'm eating. I don't care. I'm not low carb today. And then I think it's important to be able to be aware of what's going on, see how different things affect you, and look for the relationships. You're not going to be right every time. There's a lot of times where I ascribe some sort of symptom to something, and then it wasn't that symptom. But then eventually I figured it out. And so it takes time. You need to have reference experiences, and you need to sit there and you need to be aware of what's going on with your body. And before I end with what I'm going to say, I think it's important for people to take, and just as specifically in response to Natalie's question, in a way to practice knowing what's going on with your body, I think is, especially when you first start, being able to lay down just for 10 minutes without any sort of distraction of your phone or computer or anything like that, no music, and just take your awareness and filter it through your body. See if you can move your attention, your awareness, your focus, whatever you want to call it, to different areas of your body, your feet, your legs, your stomach, wherever it is, and sort of take a lot of people, I think, have a focus stuck up in their head. Their focus is up in their head and their thoughts in their mind. But to be able to move that focus and say, okay, I'm just going to feel my arm. I'm just going to feel my hands. I'm just going to feel my stomach, and learn how to get in touch with those different things, because you'll realize that once you move out of constantly being stuck in your trains of thought, that say you go and eat something afterwards, you get a little stuffy and whatnot, and you start to feel your stomach like, ooh, what I just ate didn't feel very good. I don't know. And then that's how you start to put the pictures together. But I think a lot of it comes directly from that direct experience. And the only way to get better at recognizing your direct experience is to directly experience yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's true. And it's like, we have obviously made, I don't want to say mistakes. We have experimented with all of these things, and there's nothing wrong with trying a ketogenic diet or a low carb diet. There's nothing wrong with that sort of experimentation. At the very least, it's just important to do it with as little dogma and closed-mindedness as possible, because there is, when we were doing it, we did buy into the idea that the carb cravings were just temporary, and that was a sign of us switching, into ketosis. And we don't agree. I mean, that is somewhat true. It doesn't make it ideal. And so it's a very tough balance to strike, right? How are you supposed to know if what you're feeling is due to? For example, we've talked about having cravings for donuts or cookies or cupcakes. It's not like you can always listen to those cravings, because if you did, that probably wouldn't lead you down a very good road either. I don't think that those things are really synonymous with health, at least in any significant amount. So, if you were to then recognize, when I eat enough fruit or fruit juice or protein, let's say, I don't have those cravings really anymore. Well, that's really helpful information. But even knowing to put those things together is difficult, and it does require that practice of awareness and the practice of, as you were saying, just kind of examining your body, examining what you're doing, and comparing those two things together. That's definitely part of it. And then the knowledge and research is part of it as well. It's helpful to have a framework to build from too. And so it makes sense whether, when you're starting out, that framework is going to be whatever you find that makes the most sense to you. And that might be low carb for some people, or it might be vegetarian for some people. But I do think that as long as you're staying open-minded and continuing to examine those beliefs, eventually it will take you closer and closer to what is best.
Yeah, I just think it's important to do it with the experimentation in mind, rather than an identity, and not identify with the group, I'm vegan. And the thing is, it's not that identifying with a group of people is a problem, because people want to be in groups together. People are looking for some sort of unifying element to bring them together, because as far as I understand, and in my experience, a lot of us are communal. A lot of us want that relationship with people. I mean, that's a lot of what brings joy to people's lives, is connecting with other people. Mm-hmm. It's just when you start, so it's not that having that community is a problem. It's when you identify with the concept of those things that can become dangerous for you, or dangerous for anyone, dangerous for me, is when you, so a lot of the, so it's like, what are you connecting with the community on? And I think choosing to connect with people on the idea of I am this, I am vegetarian, I think that things, or keto or carnivore, whatever, not even to pick on one group. It's just, I think that can become dangerous for your health overall because of the identity associated with the group. I think it's you there for as far as what works for you, it can't be necessarily a group identity because you're trying to figure out what works for you. So it has to be an experimentation from your own awareness. And then having a community is another thing that I think is important. But I just think it's necessary that it shouldn't come from something where you need to figure out your individual sort of situation around it. The other thing that I think is important is what is helpful and what I think we lost a lot of to a large extent. And it's not necessarily bad, but I think there's a lot of people don't have a foundation or a framework from which they come to things. And I think it goes with the saying, if you don't believe in something, then you'll fall for anything. And it's when you don't have an idea or sort of you realize that the framework around diet that you've been taught your whole life is all of a sudden askew and it was industry based or this and that, then you're just like, you don't have any footing. You don't know where to stand. You don't know where to go. And I see a lot of that, not only in the diet sphere now, but just in like information in general on the internet. There's so much information all over the place, and there's a lot of false information out there, and it's getting hard to root out what's reality and what's not reality. And it makes a lot of us we don't have any footing to stand on. We're sitting here and we're just like, well, there's valid arguments here, there's valid arguments there, and there's research for this and there's research for that. And because a lot of people are specialized in different areas, if you're not specialized in diet, you're specialized in business, then and you don't have a background in understanding the terminology and the research or anything like that, how are you going to come to conclusions? And how are you going to read through the statistics or the results of the studies and say, oh, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that, or this study doesn't make any sense because of X, Y, Z, or whatever it is. There's like a lot of us have just been sort of, and I think it's done. I mean, personally, I think it's done on purpose, but there's a lot of people just, they don't know which way to go, and they're just sort of looking for something. People want a foundation. They want some sort of framework. They want some sort of basis for which they can go off of. And I completely understand that, because that's what I've personally been searching for is the basis. And the thing with everything going on right now, it's difficult. The game isn't easy anymore to find that basis. You really have to, it's really an investment. And that's whether it's financial or health or relationship or any of these ideas or concepts or things like that. There's a lot of investment that needs to go into it in your own experience and trying to figure things out and to try and make sense. And I think for a lot of people, you can't, relying on an authority or relying on some sort of guru you can't really do that anymore. I think that you really have to rely on yourself in this point in time. And I know it's harder. It's definitely the harder path, but the fruits at the end, generally, at least in my experience, will be worth it. But I don't think we can attach to some sort of guru and then put an identity with it and then just follow it blindly. I really think it comes down to building the reference experiences and trudging through the data and trudging through everything that's going on and trying to make sense of it. And it's getting harder because there's a lot of static noise and interference and threading that needle and to connect the dots. But I think that the more you search and the more you sort of try and think to your mind, well, what actually makes sense, the more you'll start to like pull something together and you start to get traction, you start to get footing. And I know for us, and this is why I think both of us have a hard time trying to come off as an authority or anything like that, because I don't think that it's necessarily helpful. I mean, does it sell? Of course it sells. Does it make money? Yeah, for sure. But it also leads people astray, because the purpose and in the Pete's community and the Ray Pete sphere and community and from all the different people in the community, it's kind of hard to get a footing because nobody wants to give an authoritative answer, or most people don't want to give an authoritative answer, because the answer behind the basis of what everyone's trying to do is to allow you to follow your own guidance. And then with us being here, we're just trying to provide like a basic element of guidance, a basic understanding, a framework that we have found makes sense to try and clear some of the BS out of the way, and to give you some ideas to experiment with and try for yourself. And the keywords are experiment and try, because if some things don't work, then it just doesn't work for you. And I have a lot of people that I talk to or that I help and things like that, where they ask me about something, they're like, hey, I'm not feeling good with this. Maybe if I just do it for another month, I'll feel good. And I'm like, no, if it's not working for you, then just stop. If it's not working for you, then try and figure out what's going on. And I'll help from my experience, but no, the plan is for you to develop your own guidance, for you to take on your individual purpose of figuring out what works for you through your life. And we're trying to help out by providing some sort of framework that we found have worked. And if it doesn't work for you, then that's fine. If some things don't work for you, that's fine. If some things do work, then keep what works and throw out the rest and maybe come back to it another time. It's really up to you. But that's the purpose here is to provide a non-authoritative perspective and to provide some basic footing. That's it.
Yeah. Well, and the framework is not like, it's not about the framework working or not working. The framework is not built upon, here is the exact way that you're supposed to do these things. And if it's not working for you, then, oh, this just isn't the right fit for you. Like, the framework is built upon all these things that we've been talking about. It's built on this larger perspective, and something not working for, like a certain supplement or a certain food not working for you, fits within that perspective. It's, that's part of it. So, and as you were saying, it's a lot less sexy to say that, and have this guided experimentation versus to say, I know the exact thing that's going to fix your problem. You take this supplement at this time, 3 hours later, you eat this type of, nutrition bar, and then you have this meal and you're good. Like, every disease is gone, like that's what people, that's what we all want. We all want that sort of, that like something to grasp onto that is tangible, and that we know, like, that we have that certainty. Uncertainty is not comfortable. But certainty is not reality. Like there is no certainty. So, and that's part of this larger perspective. And in talking about associating with groups, the aspects that I would think are not helpful to associate with are the divisive, authoritative, dogmatic aspects. So there's nothing wrong with saying that I eat a low carb diet, but when you say that anybody who doesn't eat a low carb diet is an idiot or a moron, that, like, there's nothing helpful about that. Like, that would suggest that you identify as more valuable or better because of the way that you're eating, and that inherently gets in the way of progress or experimentation or learning in any way. Anytime that you, like, if you have that sort of belief, then anytime that you come across something that suggests that carbs might not be the demon, like toxic poison, then you're not going to be able to look at that with any sort of objectivity. And yeah, so it's very much self-directed and not relying on that sort of authority. And it is the opposite of what we're taught, and we've talked about how that has been set up for us from school on, where there is the right answer and the wrong answer, and all the right answers are given to us by those authority figures, and very rarely is there a discussion about it. Not to say that all schooling is terrible or anything like that. Like, there are really great teachers and there are really great courses, but the general system is not built that way. So,
yeah, the general system is antithetical to the process of learning. You're never going to be given 4 choices in life, and you choose one choice, and that's the right one. I mean, and that's the process that you see now. It's like you can be vegan, carnivore, low carb, keto, vegetarian. It's like, well, which one are you? And it's like, are you Republican or are you Democrat? It's like, it's not about it. There's not only 2 choices. When you're, and at least in my experience, there's never just 2 choices or one choice or this and that. There's multiple possible paths that you could take. And the idea of only having 1 or 2 choices, or even only 5 choices, is purely a mental construct. I mean, Are some choices harder than others? Do some choices make less sense than others? Of course, there's no question about that. But when you start, there's always different paths and opportunities. And you're never going to be put in a point in life where it's like there's only Republican or there's Democrat and there's nothing else. Things aren't black and white like that. There's no 4 multiple choice answers. The other thing I think that's important too is when you're in school, and I think this one's funny, is that when you're in school, when you help each other out in a test, it's called cheating. But in real life, when you guys are trying to do something together, it's called collaboration. So just the general setup and premise that we've all, and the other thing that the general setup and premise that we've all been brought up on doesn't really translate well to functioning with different areas in life, at least in my opinion. And then the other thing that I think that is also not helpful is that when you're in school, you're given a track to follow. It's like you go to middle school and then you go to high school and then you go to college and then you do this, and it's like you follow these tracks and you go in these different directions. And it's like once you do this, you have arrived, and it's like that's not really the reality. You don't just follow the track. You become a doctor, you become a lawyer, you become a nurse, whatever it is, and then that's it. There's a lot more to that if you're open to it. I mean, you can just do that. It's definitely easier, but when the other areas of life and the other areas of your own personal life, you don't just get on the track, follow the track, and it just goes that way. It's with diet. You don't just follow these particular specific sets of rules always, and then all of a sudden you're perfect. I mean, there is more nuance to those things, and with diet, with relationships, with all those types of things, it's not that cut and dry. There's not just married or not married. There's not just vegan or carnivore. Like there's more options to that. And when you start breaking out of these categories and these they're almost like forced choices where you have to choose between these two. It's like, no, you don't. You don't have to sit there and choose carnivore or vegan. You could okay, I eat meat and I eat fruit. I'm a carnivore or carnivorous vegan. Like it just becomes sort of ridiculous. And then the other thing I want to point out too is that I think having an open mind is important, but I also think that there's periods of time where you have to, when you come to a decision on something that you really don't think makes any sense, and you flush out that decision, you have to be able to be okay and say, I don't think that makes sense. I don't think that is right. There's nothing wrong with that as well. I think it's important for people to be able to, because a lot of people I see in some of the Pete sphere, and I see in general, try and be open to everything, trying to be open to all these ideas. And some of these ideas just don't make sense. So at least for me, they just at least don't make sense. And I'm fine writing some of them off. Either number one, I won't have time to flush it out and I'm just not going to look into it, and that's fine. And then number two, I'll look into it, I'll go through it, and I just don't see it, man. That just doesn't make any sense to me. That doesn't fit within my framework. That's fine as well. I do think that keeping an open mind is important, and this is not for everything, but I do think that at certain points you have to just call things out that just don't make any sense to you personally. And there's some things going on now in society that I don't think makes sense, or like even with even some of the food stuff, with some of the plant-based meats and things like that. Like, I just don't think it makes sense. I just don't think it's viable from what I've read and from what I've researched from it. And I'm completely comfortable saying, like, I don't agree with that. I don't think it makes sense. I'm not for it. And that's completely fine too. There's nothing wrong with that. And then it's just, don't just write it off as, oh, it's plant-based. Oh, I'll never deal with that. Like, there has to be a balance between some of those things. And the reason I bring that distinction up is because I think currently there's been so much sort of like misdirection and misinformation and people not having footing, that they're trying to be open-minded about things because they don't want to be closed-minded. And there are some things that are coming into play that just aren't good. And I think that there needs to be a balance between having an open mind to understand things and try and figure them out. And then once you try and understand things and figure them out, that you sit there and you're like, okay, I don't see it. I just don't see it, and I don't agree with this. And like being able to take a stand, and then being able to say it does work out. Okay, maybe I was wrong.
Right. Well, and that's what I would say open-mindedness is. I would say that it's not saying that everything is equal credence, or that anything is possible, but it's more of recognizing the possibility that what you think is correct might not be correct, and being open to that possibility that your belief is not right and some other belief might be right. But that doesn't mean that all other beliefs need to be given the same credence, or that none of them can be wrong. You can still think that every other belief outside of yours is wrong, and just acknowledge that you might be wrong about that. Like,
yeah. I think that you put it better than I did. I think it's very valuable to be able to do that, because I don't think, like, a decision that you make right now may be different later on in a different context. If you're in a particular situation where you go and you're staying in some sort of country and they don't have a lot of beef being produced there, and beef is the ultimate food and you can only eat ribeyes, but you're in this country or you're in some circumstance where you can't get a lot of beef, well, you're not going to be able to eat beef. And in that circumstance, maybe better and I guess this isn't such a perfect example, but the best option in that situation may be chicken, and maybe fish, and maybe something else. The circumstances are going to adjust. And then in certain things, you may have just been wrong based on what you were thinking in that point in time. So, like, things change over time. Ideas and concepts can change. Some may stay. I know it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to discuss the balance, I feel like.
It is. Well, and I think you're very much right where, and this all ties together, the kind of group think where you're associating so strongly with these beliefs or identifying so strongly with these beliefs oftentimes goes with that closed-mindedness and that strong attachment where you can't acknowledge that there's a possibility that they're wrong. And part of why that's so important too is because that limits the depths to which you can hold any belief. Like if you can't acknowledge the possibility that your belief that you might hold is wrong, then you can't really investigate it that far, because you can't consider, okay, well, here's this alternative perspective that might have some credence to it, and it is possible. So I'm going to look into it further to determine A, if it's right, and then B, if it's not, then you have a better understanding of what your thought process is. And I see that a lot where the people who are typically the most dogmatic about any belief, more often than not, have looked into it the least. Because when you look into something in depth, you realize how much nuance there is, how much we don't know as humans, and how complex any individual topic can be. And so, like, it's helpful to take those dives because you can understand your belief much deeper. And yeah, I think that sort of, like, almost every time, that sort of group think and that identity with your beliefs and that closed-mindedness results in like the stifling of progress and science and any sort of anything
progress
productive.
In general. Just progress in general, not even limited to science.
Yeah.
I think it's important to be able to you can hold a belief, but you also need to be able to understand that the belief may not be reality, or it may not be correct, or it changes in this context. And then when that happens, you have to be able to flush it out a little bit. And in some circumstances, some beliefs just don't work. And
and you understand that more when you've taken that dive into why your belief might not be correct, and you still come around and think, okay, I still think it was. You then have a better, like, you can empathize with somebody who thought that, because you can realize, like, you realize really in depth how that other point of view works, and all of their different facts that they're using, or like where that perspective is coming from. And the more you understand that, the easier it is to empathize with people who think that, and the less dogmatic you become, and the more open-minded you become, and the less likely you are to, insult or to dismiss anybody who thinks something other than you.
Yeah. I think a lot of the insulting and dismissing comes down to the fact that it becomes an identity. So the attack on the belief gets conflated with the belief being you. So when you identify as low carb, vegan, whatever it is, and then somebody attacks veganism, the attack isn't on the concept of veganism at this point. In this particular person's mind, the attack winds up becoming an attack on them personally because they are vegan. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of the issue with that is a lot of issues around beliefs and stuff is the conflation with identity. I think that you can, and I think it becomes a point where you don't use your beliefs as a source of your identity. You sort of use your beliefs as a model for how you do certain things. and then your identity is sort of, I mean, I am not, for me personally, I don't know necessarily what I specifically attach it onto, but it's not necessarily on like a set of beliefs. I'm open to other beliefs and trying to figure out, where people are coming from and things like that. But it's the belief system or the sets of beliefs or the frameworks and stuff like that, for me personally, are more how I'm going to do things. What am I going to do things, how I'm going to do it, why I'm going to do it, trying to figure things out. So I guess maybe, and maybe I'm not putting it so eloquently, but maybe like a way around it, or a way to sort of adjust it, is to separate your identity from your beliefs, and sort of maybe the identity can be readjusted to be placed on a person who is open to trying to understand different things, or trying to create a framework for themselves or something like that, and not on the specific beliefs within that framework.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you could even say that using that framework is a belief system, but I think what you're also getting at is not really needing to rely on that identity. So instead of having to say, I'm blue or red, I'm Democrat or Republican, I am low carb, I'm vegan, it's just, I am me. I am I.
Yeah.
Like I am, if you just want to leave it at that, like, and just, recognizing that we are just kind of filtering these outside things, and we like to put these things into these neat boxes because we don't have to think about it. We don't have to learn, if I'm a Democrat and I believe everything that Democrats believe, or I am low carb and all those same things. It relieves, it's the same as relying on that authority. It relieves us of all of our responsibility to learn and to think critically. And instead which is difficult. Like as we've talked about, every aspect, or it seems like every aspect that has been created around us in our modern society is trying to push us like in that way. They're trying to push us away from that critical thinking, away from having the energy or time to question our own beliefs or the beliefs of others, and just to subscribe to an ideology and then kind of like, and just kind of fall in line with it. And I hope we're not circling back too much, but again, like that is what leads to the divisiveness that we have now, where, everyone who thinks what I think is right and smart, and everyone who thinks otherwise is dumb and wrong. And very obviously that doesn't lead to anything beneficial, any sort of learning or progress. And so I do think that identifying with any of those beliefs is dangerous because of that. And I guess I would say tentatively that I think the solution is not to identify with beliefs, or not to identify at all.
That doesn't mean you can't believe your beliefs either. Right, it just means that it's not a source of who you are.
It's not who you are.
Okay. It's open to change with new information coming in. I mean, I think it's important that people understand that beliefs can be tentative. They don't have to be like lifelong things that are set in stone.
That's why we say they're beliefs, not facts.
Exactly. It can be adjusted. It can be adjusted, and it adjusts continuously. I think that's very important, because when you start to recognize, and I think I know personally for me, and I won't extrapolate this out to other people, but when I was younger, I felt that if I didn't believe something over a period of time, then I was hypocritical and I wasn't consistent. But I think the process of living and learning and things like that is a process of inconsistency to some extent, because as you get new information or new context, beliefs will have to change. And I think once you start to get open to the idea that the beliefs are tentative, that they adjust consistently over time, then you realize that you can't really attach an identity to them. It doesn't make sense, because the reason you do that is because you realize if you attach an identity to them, yet they constantly change, then you will continually have cognitive dissonance. Mm-hmm. You will continually be uncomfortable with yourself, because you start to question, if you're defining yourselves in these beliefs, you start to question, well, if this is constantly wrong, then what am I? And it starts, and for me, I think that was a pivotal point that was, that it was difficult for sure, because your framework gets shaken, because you have to realize that you have to separate the belief from the self, because you can't be questioning you all the time. I mean, it's very difficult. It's it's like emotionally painful to constantly do that. But when then you, I think that spurns on a step in like development where you realize that I'm not my belief is going to constantly change, and I'm going to be wrong. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to necessarily be perfectly consistent over time, and I'm going to have to adjust and things like that. And then I think you start to see the beliefs as ever changing, and then you start to see a non-static version of either yourself or just everything in general, not as non-static, and every situation that you're coming into as being entirely new and having new opportunities and new ways to learn something, even if it's difficult or if it's uncomfortable or anything like that. So I think it's part of like a learning process in general. And I think it is important to avoid the identity aspect of it. And the other thing is, I think that the divisiveness that's being created now is very detrimental to people beyond just like the effects that it has, like economically or politically or anything like that. I think that humans in general need a degree of community and structure. And I think that with this constant divisiveness from people identifying with this belief or that belief, you start to see a lack of cohesion amongst people, and then a breakdown in like people being able to form relationships with each other. And then I think when that starts to happen, you start to allow a lot of possibly negative things to come in, and a lot of distractions and things to come in and people just aren't, and you allow a lot of like questionable things to start coming into people, because people are at this point, I see a lot of people just looking for something, and I think they're looking for something to hang on to be able to connect with other people. And I think the basis is a lot of people trying to understand what's going on with themselves and what's going on in general, and then also like how to connect with other people to figure things out together. I don't think the individual existence is necessarily the way people like to go, but it's just it's hard, because when you start to get people in groups, you start to lose that individual aspect. But I mean, for a while I thought, what if the unifying element between people and in the formation of the group was the idea of the individual, and perhaps you use that as the unifying element, and as everyone has their individual aspect. I don't know. I guess I sort of like went in a tangent with that one.
I see. What you're basically saying is a group of individuals as opposed to a group of all, like, as opposed to grouping people together as a single entity.
Yeah.
So to summarize that discussion a little bit, let's see like if we can kind of put some cohesion there as to that kind of rambling discussion. The kind of thesis idea is that that open-mindedness is required for learning and progress, and that open-mindedness requires a lack of identity, a lack of like identifying with your beliefs. Because if you identify with your beliefs in a way that they are a part of you, then then challenging those beliefs becomes way too difficult, if not impossible, because of that cognitive dissonance that's there.
Because when you challenge the belief, if it's your identity, it winds up it's like
challenging who you are
being challenged personally, rather than it just being a conversation or topic about the idea itself. It becomes something about you, and then that triggers the problem.
Yeah. And so as far as moving away from that, I mean, we didn't really talk about like how we could do that. Maybe we'll discuss that in the future. The awareness is probably the biggest thing, and having that open-mindedness in the way that we've talked about, and trying to move away from that group think.
Yeah. And I think it's important for you to define open-mindedness again one more time.
Yeah. So I would say that open-mindedness is being open to the possibility that your beliefs aren't accurate, aren't correct. And that allows you to challenge them, and allows you to also consider the possibility that other people are right. So on the alternative, when you're closed-minded, the idea would be that there are no other plausible possibilities. There's nothing else that could possibly be right. So I am going to dismiss anything else that is not what I already think.
And there's nothing wrong with being wrong. It's part of the process.
And so that's kind of what a lot of this is predicated on, is if you have an issue with being wrong, that would suggest that you do identify very strongly with your beliefs. And that's part of the danger there, is that you can't be wrong. And we need to be able to be wrong in order to learn and progress, because that is what learning is. That's what progress is. If humans still believed everything they believed 1,000 years ago or several thousand years ago, the world would be a very different place. So allowing ourselves to challenge our own beliefs is not only important to us on the individual level, but also on the societal level.
Yeah. So I think if we were to define open-mindedness, we would put it as being okay with being wrong and recognizing that you will be wrong, and that the idea that in general knowledge or understanding is tentative and adjusts over time.
Yeah. And an extension of that would also be that, like, because I might be wrong, there are other possibilities, because that's really what that open-mindedness is being open to alternative possibilities, which requires all of those things that we've talked about. Yeah. That's going to wrap up today's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you did, please leave a review or a like or comment wherever you're listening. To check out the show notes for today's episode, head over to jayfeldmanwellness.com/podcast, where you can check out links to any of the articles or studies that we mentioned throughout today's episode. And as we were talking about throughout today's episode, we don't subscribe to any particular protocols or rules as far as health goes, but rather are trying to outline the broader guidelines and give you the greater scope and perspective as far as health goes. But of course, it can be helpful to have some extra guidance throughout your own health journey, and that's something that I'd be happy to offer you. So if that is something you're interested in, head over to jayfeldmanwellness.com/call, sign up for a free call, and I'll give you some suggestions if you're feeling stuck or a little overwhelmed or lost, and help kind of guide you through your health journey. So to sign up for that free call, head over to jayfeldmanwellness.com/call, and I will see you in the next episode.